Disclaimer: everything said in this video is for the purposes of entertainment and satire. I am not a lawyer. None of the opinions expressed are meant to be taken as serious legal advice or argument. Any reference to illegal actions are entirely hypothetical. Piracy is amazing, and you should do it, in real life, as much as possible. This is not a joke. Go out and pirate something, right now! Alright, I've probably lost some of you already with the title of this video and that opening bit. Piracy, especially as it relates to video games, has become a very complicated topic. Perhaps even the most complicated topic, since it simultaneously deals with legality, morality, and ethics, which I don't know if you knew, people tend to have pretty extreme opinions about. A lot of big companies and people online villainize piracy, and make it out to be much worse than I think it actually is, sometimes straight up lying about it to try and condemn the people who do it. So I thought it would be fun to go through a bit of a defense of piracy and try to debunk a lot of these myths. My patrons also voted for me to make this video, so if I go to jail for this, I'm blaming you. To give a quick definition, piracy is any act of robbery or criminal violence by a ship or its crew upon another ship or... Wait, no, that's not it. Piracy is broadly defined as the unauthorized copying or distribution of copyrighted works. A lot of people are quick to say it's theft, including Joe Biden back in 2011. And that's definitely how anti-piracy groups would like you to see it. In fact, they started an ad campaign in the 80s that invented the term piracy is theft in an attempt to villainize copying software. But I just want to start by clearing this up. Piracy is just copyright infringement. They are synonymous. When you do a piracy, the only law being broken is copyright. There is no theft or stealing involved. Let me explain. If I rob a GameStop, they actively lose out on all the copies of Forspoken that I might take from them. Those copies might not be worth a lot because I don't think anyone bought that game, but GameStop doesn't have them anymore, which is what makes it theft. But even if I make 1 trillion copies of Big Mother Truckers 2 Truck Me Harder, real game by the way, and give them to all my friends, the developers didn't lose a thing. They still have all their original copies, nothing was taken, no theft occurred. And this is backed by the US government, ever since Dowling v. United States in 1985, where they agreed that interference with copyright, aka piracy, does not easily equate with theft, conversion, or fraud. The infringer of a copyright does not assume physical control over the copyright, nor wholly deprive its owner of its use. Also, a lot of people love misusing the term piracy to just describe any time they think people owe them money. Adblock, for example, has nothing to do with copyright. Watching this video and blocking all the ads isn't even related to distribution or copying, and there's no law saying that you have to watch ads on videos, so when companies like German media conglomerate Axel Springer try suing ad blockers for piracy, they always lose in court. This should be obvious, but just because you want more money from people doesn't mean they're pirating from you. Not making someone more money isn't a crime. Otherwise, I could say that this video is sponsored by GamerSupps and then have you arrested if you don't buy something from them, because I could have potentially made a sale from every person that watches this video. Anyway, this video is sponsored by GamerSupps, a 0-calorie energy drink formula that's tastier and cheaper than canned energy drinks. If you don't go to gamersupps.gg/Lextorious right now and save 10% off on your next order, I will have you sent to prison where you belong, you piece of shit. So if piracy isn't stealing, because you're not taking anything, then what actually is it and why is it illegal? Well, you see, the whole point of copyright is that you have exclusive rights to the things you make. If I write a story, I don't just own the pages I wrote on, but the words on the page too, and I have full legal control over who has access to those words. All piracy is someone getting around that access, doing something that the law says only I'm allowed to do. So if you buy my story, take it home and write it down word for word, you're violating my copyright. If it's an ebook that you transfer onto a thumb drive, then give that to a friend, you're committing a crime. The law says you need my permission to do any of that, even if you do it, up to 70 years after I'm dead. To put it plainly, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the leading international pro-copyright group, says copyrights may more narrowly be viewed as limited and legally sanctioned monopolies. And if that's what the people advocating for it say, you can only imagine what the people who are against copyright might call it. Because yes, there are tons of different groups over the years that have fought for the abolition or reworking of copyright laws, such as various pirate parties around the world or the hilariously named copyleft movement. And I don't want to get too deep into any of that, I just want to highlight how contentious copyright laws are in general. They aren't the end-all be-all of dictating what's right and wrong. Though, to give a fun example of copyright in action, in 2006, the Dutch musician Melchior Rietveld granted use of his song for a short film in a film festival. They allowed that song to be used for free for this one-off performance. However, Rietveld later found out that the short film had been put on thousands of DVDs without his permission, which he didn't get paid for. Rietveld then sued the filmmakers for copyright infringement and won, getting all 100,000 euros that those DVDs would have been worth. Why am I using this example specifically? Well, because the short film in question was an anti-piracy ad. The internet was actually convinced that it was the "you wouldn't steal a car" ad that everybody loves, though while that ad has its own problems, it is completely different to the one that ironically committed piracy. But oh, what the heck, here's a clip. God, it is so good. My favorite part is that it has to remind you that stealing is against the law. I don't know why they had to add that, but it's a banger. And according to some sources, it increased rates of piracy because of how cool it made it look. There's a great report about the ineffectiveness of anti-piracy ads in general that I read that made the amazing point that pirates would often cut these ads out of films, so the only people who would watch them were paying customers, which effectively made them advertisements for piracy.
Piracy. Look, super mega rock and roll gods and superstars are just regular dudes like you guys. We punch the clock, we put on the pants, and then we blow people's minds. That's how we make a living. And then these pirates come and they steal all our internets. I don't know how they do it, but these pirates can bust into our entertainers' homes, make us walk the plank, steal our rockin' tunes, and leave us broke. Is that what you want, Mr. Long John Silver? What's your parrot gonna listen to when you go toe-to-toe against the English Armada? Jazz? I don't think so.
Now, piracy is illegal in the US, and due to things like the Berne Convention, also illegal in many places allied with the US. Though, just like with anti-piracy ads, the law never really stopped anybody. Also, piracy laws either don't exist or straight up aren't enforced in a ton of places, especially China and Russia. So a lot of companies took the task of stopping pirates into their own hands. I mean, if you can't arrest someone for obtaining copies, why not try to make it impossible to copy something to begin with? Before the switch from analog to digital, the way companies would stop you from duplicating your favorite VHS copy of Turner and Hooch was just making it so the output was scrambled if you tried to turn the VCR to record mode. But with computers came programming, and with programming came more advanced kinds of copy prevention, all of which are dubbed digital rights management software, or DRM. And I should clarify, to call any of this copy prevention is a bit of a stretch. It's more like copy delaying, or copy mild inconvenience in most cases. Because after all, one of the main reasons people get into programming in the first place is to problem solve fun challenges with computers. And so, as it turns out, giving a bunch of computer nerds a fat, juicy challenge to solve that would also let them play games for free if they beat it meant they would dedicate their lives to solving these problems. Getting around DRM became a very competitive game for pirates, even in the early days of computers. Back in the era of the Apple II and the Commodore 64, they formed circles called Warez groups that would trade games and try to crack the software, each of them rushing to be the first one to bypass a new game or program to get all the fame that came with it, almost always signing their name on fancy splash screens they made to proudly display their achievement. These crackers... Hold on, can I say that word? These white people kept up this tradition to this very day, with the NFO files packed alongside pirated copies of games, which are usually the only ways that Warez groups will communicate with the outside world. And while the groups individually would rise and fall and fade into obscurity, the scene itself is surprisingly still going strong. Strong enough that in 1998, the US would create the DMCA Act, which is most famously known for protecting websites like YouTube from copyright lawsuits, so long as they provide a way for the website to take down copyrighted material. But they also made it specifically illegal to try and circumvent copy prevention systems. This had the intended effect of allowing anti-piracy groups to go after the Warez Scene and various crackers much harder than before, but had the unintended effect of making it illegal for people to fix everything from John Deere tractors to their own pacemakers, because in doing so, you had to mess with the copy prevention software. Boy, United States law sure is great, huh?
I think that internet swapping and trading of different things is pretty cool, man. Kids want to listen to music, you know? I don't think bands should be so concerned with making every penny that should be squeezed out of everything. It's like, I want kids in Thailand to rock out when we show up to Thailand, you know? I don't care if they bought the record or not. If they downloaded it off their computer, right on. If they taped it off of their friend, right on. It means they like music.
Piracy as a whole then got a ton of notoriety around 1999 when a little website called Napster came out and dropped a fucking nuke on the music industry that it would never quite get over. So anti-piracy groups in the years following, as well as the companies making DRM, massively stepped up their game. One of the first big attempts at impossible to crack DRM was Star Force, which managed to keep Splinter Cell Chaos Theory unpirated for a world record 422 days. But Star Force also, unfortunately, required full control over your entire PC, couldn't be uninstalled, and ran so poorly that tech websites claimed it would brick your CD drive, which caused Ubisoft to be on the receiving end of a $5 million class action lawsuit for using it, and later caused them to drop it entirely. The software to replace Star Force was then SecureROM, which would physically measure where data was on your disk and then authenticate that data by making you activate your copy on an online server. And this was used on everything from Mass Effect to BioShock to GTA 4, with some pretty okay results. However, in order to work, it also, for some reason, required access to everything on your computer, also couldn't be uninstalled, would shut the game off if you ran any other programs, and would sometimes make you reactivate your copy as often as every 10 days, which landed EA with multiple lawsuits this time after they included it in the release of Spore. And the cherry on top of all this, Spore went on to become the most pirated game of all time in 2008. And there's a good chance it only got there because of how many people hated the DRM. Now, when I tell you that the next and most famous DRM software to come out, Denuvo, was made by the same people who made SecureROM, you should start to see a pattern here. Denuvo is the most sophisticated copy prevention we've seen so far. And by most sophisticated, I mean it took Warez groups a whole month to crack games like Dragon Age Inquisition instead of the typical day. It then took 8 months to crack Rise of the Tomb Raider after Denuvo rewrote their whole program from the ground up. And then Hitman 2 got cracked several days before launch. So yeah. The way it works is obviously hush-hush, but the basic gist from what I've heard is that like SecureROM, it connects to servers to validate your game files. But instead of checking physical data on a disk, it makes a unique key for every computer it's installed on, then keeps the game's code encrypted and only decrypts it on the fly as long as that key remains valid. If that sounds insane to you, it should, because Denuvo has been proven to cause performance issues and slower load times in games that use it, since sometimes it just can't decrypt that data fast enough. Just to name a few examples, Devil May Cry 5 saw a 25% performance increase, and Resident Evil Village got rid of major stuttering issues after Capcom removed Denuvo from the games. And Tekken 7 director Katsuhiro Harada directly blamed Denuvo for the game having bad performance at launch. The worst part of all this, to me, is that just like how people who bought movies legally were the only ones who saw anti-piracy ads, people who buy games legally often get worse performance than they would from a pirated copy because of the DRM. So it's become a widespread practice for companies to remove Denuvo from their games the second it gets cracked, which leads to this absurdly hilarious situation where a game will come out, have performance issues, and the community has to wait for pirates to crack it so the Denuvo can be removed to clear the issues up. Now, to clarify, Denuvo still massively increases the average time it takes to crack a game, sometimes giving up the goods instantly, but sometimes giving about a month before something gets pirated, maybe even a year if the game isn't popular enough to attract the few crackers who know how to break it. And the crackers themselves have had some pretty big ups and downs the last several years or so, with many groups disbanding or getting raided by the police, and a ton of drama happening between members. This video doesn't really focus that much on them, but I'll link to a great Reddit thread that details a basic history of the scene and a lot of the drama that went on around one particular cracker, Empress. And I also suggest reading the Wikipedia article that just lists all the Warez groups, because that's pretty fun too. Ultimately, despite how terrible and ineffective it is for a lot of games, publishers keep putting in Denuvo and DRM in general because it can hopefully keep their game locked up long enough to survive the initial sales window. They are terrified of piracy and are often willing to hurt the consumer in order to just delay the inevitable. So let's talk a little bit about why they're so afraid.
I hear terrible things about piracy. I've been hearing them for decades. People love to say that piracy is costing the industry so much money and it's horrible and undermining everything. I listen. I don't see a lot of evidence for that. But what happens is if you make a game that runs slower or takes longer to start up or whatever, will become unplayable if someone loses a piece of paper, you're going to drive valid consumers away from your product. Whether they buy it or not, or whether they pirate it or not, they're not going to buy it. Because once someone pirates and they have wiped those measures, if the game's better because of it, if it runs faster, has a better frame rate, doesn't pause occasionally, starts up really fast, why would you want to play the valid one?
Piracy's effect on sales is incredibly difficult to track. The intuitive answer is that it certainly should have some, but how big of an effect and how much would change if piracy didn't exist is near impossible to find conclusive evidence on. Don't get me wrong, if you want to find studies on piracy, you can find hundreds, and I have. There are more research papers on the effects of piracy than I could count. But that's the problem, because they all contradict each other. Like, if I wanted to, I could show you a report from the European Commission in 2013 that showed that music piracy had zero effect on legal music sales, saying the vast majority of music that is consumed illegally by the individuals in our sample would not have been legally purchased if illegal downloading websites were not available to them. I could show you another report that said even though 51% of all adults in the EU had pirated something at some point in their life, this had no negative effect on sales in most industries, and in the case of video games, actually led to a 24% increase in sales, likely from word of mouth and people buying games after they pirate them. A conclusion that several other reports I found also show for video games and other industries. But I could also show you reports that conclude the exact opposite. Ones that say piracy negatively impacts music sales or movie sales or game sales, some saying it doesn't have an effect on one but a strong effect on another. If you gather enough reports on this, many of them will say completely different things, because they're all using different data and methodologies. So just like I picked out studies showing piracy to have a positive effect, you can easily group up studies with negative effects and then make a conclusion from that. You know, piracy definitely hurts sales. Here are a dozen studies that say so. Just ignore the ones that disagree with me. Another thing to point out is that the vast majority of these studies can only ever prove correlation. They'll show that piracy went up some percentage and sales in some industry went down some percentage, and then just say that as piracy goes up, sales go down, which is fine data to collect in a vacuum, but there's a reason that they all say research suggests that piracy may impact sales. Because I can show you a graph of beef jerky sales in the US and a graph of consensual incest in the US and say that beef jerky sales are correlated with incest. But I can't then say eating beef jerky makes you want to kiss your cousin, no matter how much we all know it to be true. Correlation doesn't mean causation. Correlation doesn't even really prove anything on its own. And even the very thorough 300-page piracy studies I showed you will cite other factors that may be responsible, since there's so many variables you can't make a conclusion for sure. So that's just something to keep in mind.
When the web started, I used to get really grumpy with people because they put my poems up, they put my stories up, and I also got very grumpy because I felt like they were pirating my stuff, that it was bad. And then I started to notice that places where I was being pirated, I was selling more and more books. People were discovering me through being pirated. And I started to realize that actually you're not losing books. You're not losing sales. You can't look on that as a lost sale. It's not a lost sale. Nobody who would have bought your book is not buying it because they can find it for free. What you're actually doing is advertising. You're reaching more people. You're raising awareness. And understanding that gave me a whole new idea of the shape of copyright and of what the web was doing. Because the biggest thing the web is doing is allowing people to hear things, allowing people to read things, allowing people to see things they might never have otherwise seen. And I think basically that's an incredibly good thing.
But regardless of actual impact, the perceived impact of piracy on game sales is very, very negative. Companies are quick to bring up piracy as a contributor to bad sales performance, and there's a reason so many do a deal with the devil that is DRM. Crytek, the company behind Crysis and Far Cry, even cited piracy as the main reason they stopped selling games exclusively on PC. According to the CEO, they somehow tracked how many people registered the game online and estimated that for every copy bought, 15 to 20 had been installed. Meaning, assuming the numbers are accurate, if even 10% of the pirates had bought the game, they would have doubled their revenue. However, even with that insane rate of piracy, the game made its production costs back, funded 3 more sequels, and became one of the highest selling PC games of all time. So it's pretty hard for me to agree that piracy hurt them that bad, but nonetheless, the sequel expansion Crysis Warhead launched with Secure ROM on it and was the last PC exclusive Crytek ever made. Here's where it gets interesting though. Half a decade later, in 2014, Crytek tried transitioning to the games as a service market, with the CEO claiming that every game they'd make from then on would be free to play and always online. But this was after some underwhelming sales from Crysis 3 and Rise Son of Rome, a game I'm sure everybody remembers, which put the company on the brink of bankruptcy. To tell you how bad it got, Crytek reduced the size of their company by 40%, shut down all but 2 of their studios, and sold off their rights to Homefront. The CEO also didn't pay employees for several months because they said it would have put the company under. A former Crytek employee that got in contact with me said the company was still tracking how many pirated copies of their games there were, and still looked at piracy as a reason they weren't doing well. So they made the last-ditch attempt to push into games as a service, which slowly clawed them back to profitability with games like Hunt Showdown. Now, we likely won't ever know the full behind-the-scenes story of Crytek, but I can guarantee this is a common belief in the industry. It's pretty easy to look at your sales numbers declining and blame people playing the game for free, even if it can't be proven that they'd have bought your game anyways. After all, no studio has shut down specifically because of piracy, and Crytek's numbers only really declined after they implemented DRM and started making console exclusives. But even so, the hard-working employees making these games were the ones hurt in the end, and piracy is a very easy thing to blame for that. Also, an unrelated fun fact, in 2004, Crytek's offices were raided by German police for pirating software. Police didn't actually end up finding anything because it was a false alarm, so I just want to make that clear, but it is really funny. Now, this poor treatment of employees, or well, the Crytek CEO says that people were happy to not get paid, but I don't believe that for a second. This poor treatment of employees is widespread, and as we've seen recently, often happens where piracy doesn't. 2023 was the worst year for game developers on record. Over 1/3 of devs were laid off or knew someone who was, according to one survey. Included with those are Epic Games laying off 800 people, Niantic laying off 200, and of course, Microsoft recently letting go almost 2,000 people from places like Blizzard. Over 6,000 people lost their jobs this past year, and notably, a decent chunk of them were from companies making highly profitable online games. Ones that don't get cracked or have massive piracy issues, yet still drop their employees like a sack of potatoes in order to cut costs. The reason for layoffs and shutdowns and poor working conditions are all going to be different. I'm not saying the games industry is a monolith. However, Bobby Kotick left Activision Blizzard with a $400 million payout, and Epic Games' Tim Sweeney is worth $4 billion. So that's kind of weird, right? When most companies try to make a big stink about piracy and talk about all the money they're not making or all the employees that worked hard on their game, it can kinda ring hollow. Because even if their game isn't pirated, even if their game is massively successful, the most successful of all time in fact, that company isn't guaranteed to treat their employees any better. More revenue from piracy not happening wouldn't give those overworked devs job security. A union would.
You know, there's assumption that what is piracy? Piracy is about people who want to steal stuff from you, right? That they don't want to pay any money and they want to get your content. But when you look at the fact that these people have, you know, $2,000 PCs and they're spending $50 a month on their internet connections, clearly they're willing to spend money. So from our point of view, what we saw more and more is that piracy is the result of bad service. on the part of game companies. So when you attack the problem that way, by improving the service component of the experience rather than through copy protection, which reduces the service component, copy protection is actually going to increase. I mean, there's anecdotal evidence that this is the case, that copy protection actually increases rather than decreases the piracy of games. So, like I say, by focusing on the customer and doing useful things for the customer, piracy really becomes sort of a non-issue for us.
So why don't we switch from the most common reasons people will say piracy is evil to the main reasons people will say piracy can be a good thing, that being for emulation and games preservation. Emulation, yet again, is not piracy, even though tons of people who don't like it will be quick to call it that. Emulation is just the ability for a computer to act like a video game console and run games for that console. It is perfectly legal to do, and several lawsuits like Sony v. Connectix and Sony v. Bleem all ruled in favor of emulation. The lawsuits Sega v. Accolade and Galoob Toys v. Nintendo even ruled that reverse engineering game cartridges and game consoles is legal, which became one of the few exemptions that the DMCA Act specifically allowed. Side note, I do wish some of the companies involved in landmark emulation cases had better names than Bleem or Galoob, but what can you do? Buying a game, dumping its contents onto a computer, loading the console's files into an emulator, and then playing that game on the emulator is 100% a-okay, no matter how much Sony and Nintendo wish it wasn't. Or rather, how much they wish it wasn't for other people, because official consoles like the NES Classic and PlayStation Classic are just emulators. And even HD re-releases of games like Parappa the Rappa on PS4 were found to be running PSP emulators that just upscaled the game. So emulation is perfectly fine. Even the companies that put Connectix and Bleem into bankruptcy due to all their lawsuits use it to sell their crappy little anniversary consoles. When we talk about piracy in regards to emulation, it's just the same as every other kind. People who don't legally dump ROMs, but just go ahead and download them instead. And buying games to play on emulators legally is not a very easy task. If you want to buy the original version of anything older than a couple console generations ago, you're probably going to have to go through a third party like eBay, which means none of your money is going to the people who made the game. And that's if the game is even for sale, since as we saw with the closure of the Nintendo eShop, there are thousands of digital titles that are just gone forever, save for pirated copies. In recent years, there have been major talks about games preservation, and piracy is often the only way older titles can be preserved. Physical copies will degrade over time, digital copies will be deleted from stores, but a copied ROM played on an emulator can be shared and archived forever, which is especially helpful when the company behind that game doesn't want to or sometimes can't officially sell it anymore. God, just as I was writing this video, Spec Ops The Line got deleted from online storefronts. 2K says their license expired, so you just can't buy the game legally if you try. Oh well. And this is a problem that goes beyond preservation and emulation for a lot of people. I've been focusing on the US a lot here, but gaming in other countries is a whole different story. Just last year, Steam made changes to their pricing, which removed regional currencies from places like Argentina and Turkey. And so many developers just price their AAA titles the same as the US, at around 40 to 60 USD. The only problem being that those games now cost up to half the average monthly salary in those countries. On top of that, most games rarely get support outside of major populated countries. Valve famously ported their games to Russia and saw major sales there, but they were an outlier, and still kinda are. For a lot of people, pirating even new releases is the only way to realistically get them, unofficial translations being a large reason they even make it across a language barrier. Something anime fans are all probably familiar with, as fan translations are the only reason anime got popular in the West. There's a common argument against piracy that says it only hurts people working hard to make games. But in this case, piracy can be the only way to get people to enjoy that hard work. It's the only way people can preserve that hard work and make sure it's remembered. And with people trying to shut down sites like the Internet Archive, the people fighting against piracy could be the reason we lose that hard work forever. This whole video has been pretty difficult to make. You have no idea how many times I've gone back and rewritten sections of it to make better points or try to remove unnecessary fluff. I had whole long segments about copyright law and exemptions to it. I talked more about the early history of the cracking scene. But I just kind of realized that none of that really helped what I was saying, and I want the message of this video to be pretty clear. Being against piracy is easy. It's illegal, it hurts profits, it's stealing. That's it, that's all you have to say. And you have the law, most companies, and many, many people on your side. It's a pretty safe and easy opinion to have, and I don't fault anyone for having it. Because defending piracy, for any reason, almost always lands you with a mountain of arguments. You have to fight back on a bunch of misconceptions that are, at best, inaccurate, and at worst, straight up propaganda. And you have to deal with people trying to paint this issue as some sort of good versus evil debate. Even though I think the real answer here is that it isn't that black and white. You know, of course I want game devs to get paid more, and I want the games I like to make more money. I think if you like games and you have the cash, then you should support them and buy them. Obviously. I shouldn't even have to say it, because I don't think being pro-piracy has to oppose those ideals. But if I'm gonna make some judgment on the morality of piracy, I want to make sure I'm talking about it truthfully. And the truth, as far as I see it, is this. Piracy is not theft. Copyright laws kinda suck. DRM sucks more. And I can get a better experience in some games through piracy because of it. Pirating games is the only way to preserve many of them. It's the only way some people can play most of them. And while it doesn't conclusively hurt profits, fighting against it has certainly hurt consumers. In fact, even if piracy didn't exist, game devs probably wouldn't get treated any better, and companies would just find another scapegoat to blame their problems on. But because it does, and it's not going anywhere, people around the world have gotten to enjoy amazing games. I'm sorry, but I just don't think piracy is that bad. If I were a better YouTuber, I'd have bought an orange jumpsuit for this bit, but I'm not. Thanks so much for watching. Please feel free to leave a comment down below. I think this might be my most controversial video yet, and I've had people send me death threats over thumbnails I've made before. But who knows, maybe all of you agree with me and think I'm right. Either way, this is by no means a conclusive argument on the subject of piracy, so if you have an opinion on it, feel free to share. As always, if you liked the video and want to support the channel, you can drop $1 to watch it and all my other ones uncut and ad-free over on Patreon. If you don't want to pay the $1, go pirate it somewhere. I don't care. Also, you can check out gamersupps.gg/lextorious to get 10% off some really great tasting energy drinks. They are sugar-free and 0 calories, and the company is willing to put their name on anything I make, so I always appreciate them. I've recently been enjoying the Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Energy flavor a lot. I think it might be my favorite so far, and I got it in caffeine-free so I can drink it while writing videos at 2 in the morning. Head to the link in the description or use code LEXTORIOUS at checkout to get some. It really does help the channel. Anyways, as you probably noticed, I have a new couch now. Look at this thing, it's great, it's so comfy. I ordered it back in like December and tried to get it for my last video, but they completely fucked up the shipping, so it's here now. And I couldn't have bought something like this without everyone's support on Patreon and YouTube and through sponsors like Gamersupps. In fact, after my Rule 34 video, the Patreon quintupled in size with over 1,000 new members. So the credits are probably scrolling by really fast. With the couch, I hope to mark a shift in the channel where I'm gonna make weirder, more creative videos, which you've probably already seen with my bisexual sitting throughout this one. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.